April 21, 1982. First light over San Carlos water in the East Falkland Islands. The ramp of the merchant vessel MV Elk grinds open above the Atlantic swell. A strange green tractor lurches forward into the cold surf, 17.5 tons of bolted aluminium, a massive earth bucket folded against its back, twin water jets churning behind it, a solid fuel rocket strapped to its top deck. The Royal Marines watching from the rails saw a builder's machine swimming to war. The thing looked like a contractor's digger that had wandered onto a battlefield. Its driver sat facing forward. Its commander sat facing backward. Its only armament was a single optional machine gun and a smoke discharger. Its hull was rated against rifle bullets and shrapnel only. And in the next 8 days, this absurd little vehicle would humiliate every prediction made about it. It would crawl up beaches no tank could land on. It would breach Argentine minefields ahead of 42 Commando. It would ride the ridge from Wireless to Sapper Hill and rumble into Stanley with a Union flag thrown across its engine deck. Then it would go on to fight in the Gulf, in Bosnia, in Iraq, and, improbably, on the Kursk front in 2024. The Royal Engineers called it the Frog. Officially it was called something else entirely. In a quiet office at the Military Engineering Experimental Establishment in Christchurch, a town on the south coast of England, a procurement officer was studying a problem that had no clean answer. The year was 1962. Britain's Royal Engineers had spent the entire war and the 17 years since it ended rebuilding bridges and breaching obstacles, using converted Churchill and Centurion tanks rigged with engineering kit. They were heavy. They were slow. They were tied to roads. And the army that would have to fight the Soviets in West Germany did not need a tank that could dig. It needed a digger that could keep up with tanks. So the General Staff issued Target 26, a light, air-portable, fully amphibious combat engineer vehicle. France and West Germany joined the programme. Vickers, GKN, and Caterpillar UK all submitted designs. All 3 were rejected. France quietly walked away. West Germany walked away in 1970 demanding heavier armour. Britain pressed on alone. The first prototypes were painted bright yellow. The Royal Engineers nicknamed them the Yellow Perils because they sank in spectacular fashion during early swim trials. Buoyancy bags were hastily added. Polyurethane blocks were stuffed into the hull. By 1973, the design was finally floating. By July 1975, it was officially accepted for service. And in May 1978, the first production vehicle rolled out of the Royal Ordnance Factory at Nottingham. Its formal designation was FV180 Combat Engineer Tractor, and it was the only NATO engineer vehicle of the Cold War that could swim under its own power. Now the specifications paired with their consequences. The hull was twin-skin honeycomb aluminium alloy, weighing 17.5 tons complete, light enough to fly inside a Hercules transport aircraft, which no Soviet, German or American engineer vehicle of its era could do. The engine was a Rolls-Royce C6 TFR turbocharged diesel, 12.2 litres, 320 brake horsepower. That gave it 56 km per hour on roads, fast enough to keep pace with a Chieftain main battle tank at full march. Its real arsenal was its tools. A rear-mounted bucket 2.9 metres wide and 1.7 cubic metres in capacity. It could shift 200 cubic metres of earth per hour. It could lift 6.8 tons as a crane. 2 Doughty water jet impellers, 1 each side. 8.5 knots in open water, with a flotation bag deployed inside the bucket and a splashboard rigged to the front. A Plumet hydraulic capstan winch with 8 tons of pull and a 100-metre hawser, and bolted to the top deck, the Frog's most peculiar weapon. A solid fuel rocket-propelled earth anchor designed by the Laird Company. It fired forward on 1 or 2 rockets, travelled 50 to 100 yards, and embedded a steel cruciform fluke into the ground. The Frog could then haul itself out of a river, up a slick bank or out of frozen mud by winching against the anchor it had just shot into the earth ahead of itself. It could swim, it could dig, it could lift, it could fly, it could drag itself out of trouble using a rocket, and it weighed less than half of any equivalent vehicle in NATO service. What 3 Royal Engineers of 3 different generations would later say about this vehicle, in their own words, is what makes the Frog's story matter. But first, if you are enjoying this, hit subscribe. It takes a second and helps the channel grow. Now, the Falklands. The first 2 production combat engineer tractors sent to a real war went south in May 1982. They were attached to 59 independent Commando Squadron Royal Engineers under Major Roderick MacDonald. Both vehicles were almost new. Until that posting, they had been sitting at the Royal Armoured Corps Training Centre at Bovington, used to instruct students. The commander of one frog was Lance Corporal Kevin Bradley. His vehicle had the registration 01FD58. Years later, he told an interviewer this. "I had visions that, as the ramp went down, we were going to be riddled with gunfire from dug-in machine gun nests. In my eyes, this was a real possibility, as the CET stood almost 3 meters tall and was a very easy target. The ramp went down. Nobody fired. The frog swam ashore." Over the next 72 hours, Bradley's vehicle flattened a forward operating pad for Harrier jump jets in the Verde Mountains. It cleared mine lanes ahead of 42 Commando Royal Marines for the night assault on Mount Harriet. It later helped lift a grounded Harrier back onto the strip using its own bucket. Then, on the run from Wireless Ridge to Sapper Hill and into Stanley, the 2 Combat Engineer Tractors became among the only tracked vehicles to traverse East Falkland from west to east. Bradley's verdict on his frog was 4 words long. "I personally had no complaints." 8 years later, the frog went to war again. Operation Granby, 1990 into 1991. The Royal Engineers Force in the desert included 32 Armoured Engineer Regiment, 21 Engineer Regiment, and 23 Engineer Regiment. 6 frogs deployed with 1 field squadron alone. Sapper Dave Ward of 32 Engineer Regiment was attached to the Queen's Royal Irish Hussars Battle Group. He drove a Combat Engineer Tractor with a giant Viper line charge trailer hitched behind it, full of plastic explosive. His description of the war was 3 sentences long. "For about half of the 100 or so hours into Kuwait, we were trying to dodge unexploded ordnance whilst towing 1,500 kilograms of plastic explosive. The Basra Road was carnage. We once got a parking ticket from an American military policeman in the CET. The Basra Road was the highway of death. Frogs from 32 Armoured Engineer Regiment cleared it after the ceasefire. One reportedly lost a chunk of its bucket dragging a burnt-out Iraqi tank off the tarmac. Then Bosnia. Up to 6 frogs were deployed during Operation Grapple 7. They cleared log roadblocks on routes Triangle and Diamond, the critical United Nations supply roads. They widened mountain tracks so aid convoys could reach Vitez, Tuzla, Gornji Vakuf, and Sarajevo. In July 1995, 31 Armoured Engineer Squadron drove its frogs onto Mount Igman to prepare positions for NATO airstrikes. They were on the mountain the day of the Sarajevo marketplace bombing. Lance Corporal Ewan Clark of 26 Armoured Engineer Squadron later described what amphibious training was actually like. Actual swimming wasn't anything special, but the entry was basically who could make the biggest splash. We used to take as long a run up as we could to try and get to full speed. He also told the legend the frog deserved. Doing a demonstration for the Queen in Germany, they fired the rocket anchor and either the rope snapped or it wasn't attached. The anchor carried on its merry way until the rockets fizzled out. Also heard of someone forgetting to release the hook that held the anchor to the top deck. The rockets melted a hole through it. The story is not officially confirmed, but every Royal Engineer who served on the Frog has heard a version of it. On paper, the Frog's rivals were superior in almost every measurable way. The Soviet IMAR-2, built on a T-72 tank chassis from 1982, weighed 50 tons. It carried a 12.7mm machine gun and a telescoping crane. It could not swim. The American M9 Armoured Combat Earthmover, fielded from 1986, was a single crewman vehicle with a 6.7 cubic metre scraper bowl. It was nominally amphibious at 3 miles per hour. The capability was deleted from required tasks after weight gains made it unreliable in water. The German Pioneer Panzer II DAX, built on the Leopard 1 chassis from 1989, weighed 43 tons. It had 830 horsepower and a 9.2-metre excavator boom that outclassed anything the Frog carried. It could not swim either. The Frog could swim. It could fit inside a Hercules. It could fire a rocket anchor at a riverbank and pull itself uphill. It could do all 3 at half the weight of any of its rivals. Its survival depended on staying out of direct fire. That trade-off finally caught up with it. The British Army officially withdrew the Frog from service in 2007. Its replacement was the Terrier, built by BAE Systems, weighing 30 tons, with thermal cameras, modular armour, and an arm that could be operated remotely from a kilometre away. It entered service in June 2013. 60 were delivered, but the Frog did not stop working. India had bought around 100 Combat Engineer Tractors between 1988 and 1990. The 114th Armoured Engineer Regiment of the Indian Corps of Engineers paraded them at the Republic Day Parade in New Delhi in 1989. They are still on the rolls. Singapore bought around 30 between 1993 and 1995. Singapore retired its last Frogs in January 2025, replacing them with the locally built Hunter Armoured Engineer vehicle, and in November 2024, surplus FV180 Combat Engineer Tractors painted in Ukrainian khaki, appeared in service with Ukraine's 3rd Assault Brigade in the Kursk region of Russia. 46 years after the first one rolled out of Nottingham, the Frog was still digging trenches under fire. April 21, 1982, San Carlos Water, a green tractor lurching down a ramp into the surf. The Frog was underpowered. Its armour stopped nothing larger than a rifle round. Its commercial running gear failed often enough that mechanics across 3 regiments cursed it for 30 years. It carried no main gun. Its top road speed was slower than a chieftain at march pace, and yet it worked. It worked at Stanley. It worked on the Highway of Death. It worked on Route Diamond. It worked on Mount Igman. It worked, decades after its retirement, on the Kursk front. It was the only NATO combat engineer vehicle that could swim a river, dig a trench, lift a Harrier, and shoot a rocket into the ground to drag itself uphill, all in 17.5 tons of bolted aluminium that fit inside a transport aircraft. It was not elegant. It was not fast. It was not heavily armed. It was British. And when the Royal Engineers needed a tool that no other army had thought to build, the Frog was the tool that turned up.